Machiavelli and global governance. Why elites despise independent thought, the transition to the new raison du monde. How Niccolo Machiavelli of Italy reveals to us what we see today on a global scale. The Brownstone Institute turns to Niccolo Machiavelli, the great Italian philosopher, writer, and diplomat, in order to demonstrate why the state must convince its citizens that they need it. He resorts to the same in order to prove that today it's done on a global scale. Quote, "A wise ruler must think of a method by which its citizens will need the state and himself at all times and on all occasions. Then they will always be loyal to him," end quote, the Italian philosopher pointed out disarmingly. The history of the development of modern governance is essentially a reflection of this picture. It tells us just about everything we need to know about our current predicament. Those who rule us are trying hard to convince us that we need them in order to keep our faith and thereby stay in power and gain more from it. Machiavelli was writing at a particular time in history when what we know today as the state first appeared in European political thought. Before Machiavelli, there were kingdoms and principalities, and the concept of government was essentially personal and divine. The raison d'etat, the reason for the state, after him it became secularized, temporal, and what Michael Foucault called governmental. Machiavelli forces us to think more seriously about the doctrine for which he is known today, raison d'etat, the reason for the state, or justification of a state's foreign policy, meaning in essence the reason for it to act on its own interests and above of law or natural right. The way this concept is usually described suggests an immoral pursuit of the national interest. Raison d'etat also means gaining and maintaining the loyalty of the populace to maintain the power of the ruling class, and that means thinking of ways for their well-being. And then, just as the modern state was emerging in the early 16th century, it already had at its heart a notion of itself that it had to make the population vulnerable, as we would say today, and it's not too hard to see why. Rulers want to retain power, and in a secular context in which the divine right of kings, quote-unquote, no longer holds sway, that means keeping the mass of the population on their side. In the centuries since the Italian diplomat wrote, we have seen a vast expansion in the size and scope of the administrative state, this great framework of government built largely on the basis of this raison d'etat. State, protector of the weak. It's not that, as Nietzsche says, the state is simply a cold monster imposed on society overtly. A complex series of interactions has developed with the state convincing society that it needs its protection and gaining society's consent to its expansion. The state constructs groups within the population that needs its benevolent help. These groups, the poor, the elderly, the children, women, the disabled, ethnic minorities, etc., gradually increase in number until they eventually constitute something less than the entire population. The ultimate dream, of course, is for the state to find ways to make literally everyone vulnerable and in need of its help, because their status will surely be secure forever, and there is no need to explain why various things spread so much fervor in this regard. This, then, is the basic story of Machiavelli's development of the state, essentially legitimizing the development of state power on the basis of helping the vulnerable. And it lies at the heart, and has always been at the heart, of the concept of raison d'etat, the reason for the state. But the story does not stop there. It only takes us to the end of World War II. We are now in an age, as we are often reminded, of international cooperation, globalization, and indeed global governance. There is hardly an area of public life that is not regulated in some way by international organizations of one kind or another. Global governance, raison du monde, the reason for the world, global governance. Although the decline of the state has repeatedly been shown in the overstated, we are arguably in an age where its raison d'etre has at least partially yielded to what Philip Journey once called the raison du monde, an instance on global solutions to proliferate of world problems. Like the raison d'etat, the raison du monde rejects minor constraints such as law, natural right, or morality that can limit its scope. It justifies the action according to what is considered the universal interest, regardless of borders, democratic mandate, or public sentiment. And as with the raison d'etat, it presents itself as a caring force, quote unquote, acting where necessary to maintain and improve human well-being. We can all list a number of areas such as climate change, public health, equality, sustainable development, in which the raison du monde is concerned. And everyone, we can now see why. Just as the state from its inception secured a safe course for itself through the weakness of the populace, so our nascent regime of the world government understands that in order to develop and maintain its status, it must convince the people of the world that they need it, and there is nothing conspiratorial about this. It's power. It's simply the game of human motivation. People like position and the wealth and power that comes from it. They act with all their might to improve it and maintain it when they have it. This power that motivated Machiavelli and those he advised is therefore the same power that animates people like Tedros Ghebreyesus, Director General of the World Health Organization. How does one gain and maintain power? Convince people that they need you. Whether it's raison d'etat or raison du monde, the rest just follows accordingly. Thinking of things this way also helps us understand the vitriolic attacks that participants and the anti-globalization movements received as populists. Whenever a campaign like Brexit succeeds in rejecting the logic of its raison du monde, it threatens the very concept on which the idea is based, and therefore the entire global governance movement. If a state like Britain can somehow, quote, live on its own, end quote, then it suggests that individual countries are not so vulnerable after all. And if this turns out to be true, then the entire justification for the global governance framework is called into question. This same basic pattern applies to state-citizen relations. If, after all, the population is not so vulnerable and men, women, and families can improve their lives and their communities without the help of the state, then the whole structure on which the edifice of raison d'etat rests becomes fundamentally unstable. For this reason, these movements are criticized and receive immoral attacks. We are then at the crossroads of both state and global governance. On the one hand, the imperatives of raison d'etat and raison du monde seem to have been motivated by the rapid developments of technology with much more potential to alleviate the problems of the vulnerable population, quote unquote. On the other hand, political and social movements that reject this vision are growing in influence. Where this will take us is really an open question. This is from Banking News, and I've translated this for you from a Greek article. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support, and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box